folks. Today is June 16th. It's a Monday. I'm your host, rdizzle408. Welcome to America's Talk Show, the unaffiliated follow-up to Mark Halperin's Two-Way. Okay, let's recap today's news. And before we do that, let's get back into our normal. Okay, all right. End the craziness there. Folks, we're using Perplexity as a news recap, okay? And today's headlines: Middle East conflict escalates. Iran launched a new wave of missiles at Israel, striking Tel Aviv and Haifa before dawn, destroying homes and killing at least 5 people, with dozens more wounded. The U.S. State Department has instructed embassies worldwide to communicate that the U.S. is not involved in Israel's unilateral strikes on Iran, though American forces have helped intercept Iranian missiles. Next headline: violence in the U.S. 5 people were shot, 3 fatally, including an infant, at the West Fest Carnival in a Salt Lake City suburb. In another Salt Lake incident, there was a protester who was shot and killed at a No Kings rally. In Minnesota, the suspect in the shooting of 2 lawmakers, one of whom was killed, has been captured after a statewide manhunt. There was an Air India Boeing 747-87 crash. Sorry about that, was a separate issue. And then there's the G7 going on. But those guys are the headlines for today. Mark's show, there was a guest in the end mentioning some interesting tweets from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson. So I think we could start off there, the latest on Israel and Iran, what's going on. Peter, with your hand up.
Yeah, it was really great to hear from David at the end. And I think I applaud him for having the intellectual honesty to say that, yeah, I'm sure he disagrees with them on everything else, but to acknowledge that, yes, you know, the figures on what you could call like the populist right or the MAGA right are the ones who are at the forefront of opposing war. They're pushing back against the, what could end up this, drive towards World War III, very, very possibly. And if you really it's one of the great. And, there was talk about, President Obama during the main show, a man who I once admired and now very much do not. And I think one of the understated things in the mainstream that when people look back at Obama that he did was Obama killed the anti-war movement in the United States. And I think the reason for, because even it was declining already, from what it had been in the 60s and 70s. But even in the early 2000s, you had major, street opposition, mobilized grassroots opposition to the Iraq War at the time. And I think what in retrospect, it seems clear to me that what Obama did was he presented himself as, he implied he was anti-war in the 2008 campaign, although if you pay close attention to what he said, that's actually not what he was saying. But then he made foreign interventions and wars left-coded, where it's like, oh, we're not going to war for oil. We're going to war for human rights. He had people like Samantha Power in his administration who sold things like that. And because of that coding, the vast majority of the liberal left went along with it, and now we see where we are. They've completely lost their dedication to any kind of anti-war ideals. Many Democrats are, have been trying to outflank Trump from the right from the, what you would traditionally consider the right in terms of being, if you define right as being pro-war, which, is, you can get into that, unpack that whole idea. They've, attempted to out-hawk Trump essentially, or out-hawk the GOP. And so I think that is one of the most, but it's good to see that there's still people like David out there.
Thank you, Peter. Let's bring in Claudio from Italy. You might have a physical mute there.
Here I am. Sorry. No, I was saying I'm happy that in the right, at least, there is a debate that is plural and is intellectual, while in the left, there is always the usual, as Peter say, no anti-war thing, just liberal intervention and then the said intervention. At the same time, regarding the position, I know also that Charlie Kirk, despite being pro-Israel, it's against the attacks. But for what I can say in my perspective, I think the US shouldn't intervene in the war. It should just take care to intercept the missiles to avoid the civilian casualties on the Israeli side, and at the same time, if it's true what the Wall Street Journal say that there is a signaling on behalf of the Shia regime to start back the nuclear talks, let's do it. Let's do everything that is possible to stop Netanyahu in this case. At the same time, I can tell you that differing from the Ukraine, also from Taiwan, I'm certain that there is a possibility of regime change. Sorry, not Taiwan, Iraq. Differently from Iraq, there is a possibility of change regime because the Shah is son and everyone is ready to take the place of the Shah. But at the same time, I would prefer that that happens during a transition, not during a war, for the simple reason that all the former guys in the Masnadas working with Khomeini can create a terrorist group to take back place. Instead, if it will happen on, how can I say, a transitional regime, it could be happen that it can work something. Otherwise, it can happen like in Syria. That's the problem, in my opinion. So it's better than let the Shah give up and start the nuclear talks again, but not in the Obama way, of course.
Thank you, Claudio. Joshua?
Yeah, I'm confused if the MAGA slogan is America first or if it's America only, because those are two different things, and I think the isolationism is leaning a lot more towards America only. The revolutionary regime in Iran has been the most destabilizing force in the region and abroad. I think if the chances are highly unlikely that there will be any regime change in Iran without engagement. I'm not saying that the U.S. needs to, in the words of John McCain, bomb Iran, but we should certainly help Israel take out this Iranian regime or certainly weaken them. The problem is that without kinetic action, the Iranian regime has a pretty deep bench, and they have very high rates of loyalty within the IRGC. Something like 150,000 IRGC troops, huge loyalty numbers in the higher echelons in the officer corps, and pretty decent in the enlisted corps as well. Very few defections there that we've seen. And obviously we've seen, during the 2009 Green Revolution or the Green Uprising, I mean, that was crushed. Even moderate, quote unquote, moderate candidates to become, Iranian president are pretty extreme. And we know that the country is ruled by the hardline Shias. So, it's in America's interest for the Iranian regime to see the ash bin of, or the trash bin of history.
Thank you for that, Joshua. Yes, and in my pre-show notes, I have 3 categories of rulers. It seems that we've been revolving around in the Middle East, which is either you've got kings, generals, or then the third, the Islamists, right? And I would say it's that third category that you can see. It seems the deep state's been picking that again and again. Peter from NorCal?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think that it's all well and good to talk about how bad the regime is, and I'm certainly no fan of the rulership of the Islamic Republic. But Saddam Hussein was not a good guy either. But the actions that were taken to remove him from power, you want to talk about destabilization. Certainly Iran has contributed to that, but I don't know what could be has been more destabilizing to the Middle East than the removal of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. You could also somewhat separately, you could talk about the effects that came from the removal of Gaddafi in Libya, and it's not isolationist. I don't think there's anyone, maybe with one or two exceptions, like who is it? Like, what is it? How do you define isolationism? Like, because if you define isolationism to mean we shouldn't we should not continue to pursue these regime change interventions in the Middle East, then okay, I'm an isolationist, and millions and millions of Americans are isolationists. So I don't know if that label holds water, at least in my opinion. And then if people are interested in a deeper dive on the potential consequences of pursuing this path, I would highly recommend, I'll post it in the chat. As soon as I can find it, there's a great post on X by Sohrab Ahmari, who is himself an Iranian exile. Like he's Iranian. He's the son, I don't know if he was born in Iran or not, but he's definitely from a family of Iranians who were exiled because of the regime. And he lays out just the dangers that could result from, pursuing an interventionist course here.
Thank you for that.
I will try and find that and post it in the chat, and folks can look at it.
Yeah, and I did want to mention for the viewers, right? There's a just with respect to Iran, right? They say, well, okay, I guess it's about, okay, Iran, and then this thing about nationalizing the oil fields, right? And is that seizure of private property? Gaddafi did that, and that can be said, okay, well, that's not a good thing, right? But then if you're turning the country over to Islamists, right? I think we would prefer, some sort of national agenda over Islamists, right? But then on the other hand, we have in the emperor, right? Shah just means emperor. So these words get a little confusing, right? The Persian emperor, okay, he was doing business with the West. He was doing business with Israel, okay? There's I should say, infamous interview with 60 Minutes where he's saying, look, the Israeli lobby in America is not necessarily in the best interest of Israelis, right? Because a lot of stuff gets lost in confusion, okay? And it gets a little heartbreaking for me, right? To have to explain to people, right, that like, okay, having women cover their hair is not liberal and it's not progressive. It's not a good thing. And it's not cultural, right? We're not talking about, and then people go, oh, well, look at this, black and white photo from the 1800s, of women covering their hair in the village. We're not talking about that, right? We're talking about this idea that women are somehow inciting us men, okay, with their hair exposed. Another weird thing about the way the Shia stuff went down in Iran, they can't show musical instruments on television. It sounds like the weirdest thing, but the idea is the music is shaitan, right? Satan, the devil. Okay, so there's a lot swirling around there. I think Claudio had his hand up next.
No, yeah, I agree with Peter that we shouldn't do a regime change, but at the same time, I will not say the same situation of Iraq on the details, because as I say, I think in Iran there is a possibility of opposition. What he said before, that not per force will be the son of the Shah that will be the next leader of Iran. That can be true, but at the same time, I think there is a possibility to not just tell to the Shia regime that they should do the nuclear deals. I think we can also try to ask at least to eliminate the vetting system. Do you know in Iran, the Shah, I always use the Shia and Shah, I confuse the thing, sorry. The Ayatollah, together with other sages, decide who should run for candidate and who shouldn't run. I would try at least to let the Shah move as a candidate for a political party. I know it will be weird, but it will be the most democratic way to do this transition. If they want to signal and they want to say, in exchange, we don't want that US support Israel. What does it mean to support Israel? That they shouldn't intercept missiles? I think that's on the international law to prevent civilian casualties, let's be honest. It means that we shouldn't send people on Tehran, boots on the ground. We will not send them, because it will be really a break from what Trump said on television and also JD Vance, paradoxically. I think the only way to make this stuff finish is, first of all, on behalf of the Iranians, ask to them to stop the nuclear enrichment facilities and do this thing to eliminate the vetting system, to have a real democracy. On behalf of Israel, to stop the Gaza wars. because once Iran is weakening away, there is not any more proxies that can resist by themselves. And I still think, I know Doral is here, that in 2017 it was an error on behalf of Israel to stop the intelligence operation in Gaza. They still continue that in Iran, they didn't continue that in Gaza. For me, has always been a weird thing to do on behalf of Netanyahu, to be honest, at the time.
Thank you, Claudio. Shamsul from Malaysia. Oh, unmute there.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Listening to everybody, I must say I'm a bit more towards what Joshua was saying, in terms of how he's looking at the Iranian situation. I'm definitely not. I'm practically anti-war, but here's the strange thing that I found myself actually quite splintered about this, in my opinion, because to a certain extent, well, I'm not going on a cultural basis the way you did, Rahul, but the way I see things, whether by accident or intent, what has happened over the weekend with the attack is simply this. You really can't negotiate with a religious cult. You know, they don't respond in the same way as we normal, whether it's secular, whether it's democratic, or even dictatorship, or even, shall we say, autocratic regimes that is relatively secular. Religious cults does not function in that manner. They are not into logic. And coming from the part of the world and society where I can very much understand that background, I think MAGA does not realize the existential problem that it poses. It's not about being isolationist, but you imagine you've got 2 billion people with that faith, right? If 10% is extremist, do you know how many 100 million are we talking about? Right? And it does not know any borders. And that is what has been happening with the oil money in Iran, funding the Houthis, funding Hamas, funding Hezbollah, and everything else. And yes, look, the pirates as well. Okay? So it means that I am even, I mean, you're taking a plane from here to go to Europe, and you're worried, you know. And that does not, it goes beyond it is an existential threat that needs to be reckoned with. And it cannot be done by the Iranian people alone. Because why? Because the regime hold the military power. And what we are seeing is actually a dismantling of that power. Now, whether it's done, whether you like or not, I sort of like, I'm sort of like, I said to myself, I said they had a revolution bringing down Pahlavi, and then it was taken over by the mullahs, and they have not been free ever since. And the problem is actually, this is funding the problem of the world that include what is going to affect America. That is from a geopolitical standpoint. It's forget about, you know, forget about Iraq, forget about what happened with Saddam Hussein or Libya or whatever. This is where I see the situation stands as far as that is concerned.
Thank you, Shamsul. I want to bring in Jen from Oklahoma. She hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you for unmuting me there. I couldn't get to it.
I'm getting better at this, Jen.
Couldn't get to it quick enough. I think there's some interesting things going on. First, I had my first sentence thought of, and then I got distracted. Sorry.
It's all good, Jen. We'll and the thoughts will come back. Was there anything else? Sorry.
Yeah, the fact that we're defensively helping Israel certainly indicates we're not neutral. I did not expect us to be neutral, but I'm just saying that's a firm indication, because if we were just against, loss of life, we would be intercepting missiles going both directions. So I think clearly we can't say we're just, as a nation, and as a national response through the administration, not necessarily what the people think. So I'm all for us being not neutral and on the side of Israel. We all know that. That's been my position all along. But at the same time, Israel has chosen through the course of their history to fight alone. Their motto's kind of always been blue and white. And though we have supported them financially, we have supported them with weapons and this defensive system. I'm not saying there hasn't been American stuff going on. When it comes to the boots on the ground, I don't think they're asking us to do that. Maybe I'm just being completely naive here, but I don't think they're asking that. But I don't think we can get involved with regime change. I think regime change may happen, it may not, but I think whatever happens, it has to be whatever the Iranian people want. I don't think we should be putting in, our preferred person or whatever. Otherwise, it's just gonna be yet again another totalitarian that oppresses all people or whatever, because in that region, it seems like if you get power, your first instinct is to go out and oppress everybody till they, won't resist. But anyway, so I think we should keep an arm's length, I guess is what I'm saying, an arm's length. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Peter?
Sorry. Jen makes some great points, and I'm sort of building off of those and responding a bit to some other things. And it is absolutely true. We are not neutral. We are obviously, in Israel's favor, helping them, defend themselves. And look, Israel has a right to defend itself, okay? And they have a right to take actions as a sovereign nation. They have a right to take actions that they feel are in their security interest. However, there was a shift even over days of, at first they were like, oh, well, we can do this on our own. We don't need America's help. Then it's, oh, well, we just need Americans to bomb the Fort Howe facility because only Americans have the bunker busters that can get into it. It's almost like, it gave me vibes of, the kid's story, if you give a mouse a cookie, right? He wants a glass of milk. It gave me vibes there. So it's like, our boots on the ground next, especially, given, what Netanyahu was in the clip that they played during two-way of Netanyahu implying that Iran was behind. And now he said it in a very clever way so that he could, get out of it if he was ever called on it. But he very much implied that Iran was behind the 2 assassination attempts on Trump in the 2024 campaign. And then as far as, the Iranian people themselves need to change the Islamic Republic regime, I 100% agree. I actually think that, the effect of these strikes, and again, Sora Abamari in the X post that I put in the chat, who again is an literal Iranian dissident himself in the United States, pointed out, at least in the short term for right now, these strikes have rallied people who would have otherwise opposed the Ayatollahs behind the regime. It's just what happens. It's a rally around the flag effect. And also with regards to the Shah's son, Claudio talking about him, I don't think that there's much actual likelihood, even if the regime were to fall, that he would emerge as the person who would take over. He hasn't set foot in Iran since he was 18 years old, almost 50 years ago. He is, like the average Iranian doesn't like, Iran's a pretty young country demographically, and most Iranians, except for, the very old, like don't have strong memories of the Shah's time. And even if they did, like, he has lived a very, he's lived in, mansions in Virginia his whole life. And he and or it was either him or his wife, some member of the former imperial family. They made posts on social media essentially supporting the airstrikes. It's like that's the if your goal is to come back and be restored to power, even just tactically or strategically, that was a terrible mistake, because you are not going to win. If your goal is to win back the support of the people, even if you oppose the regime, you should not be endorsing those, because you're just going to get yourself seen as a traitor in the eyes of even Iranian people who are opposed to the Ayatollah and the Islamic Republic regime.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, and if I believe I'm correct on this, that the Shah emperor, the prince or whatever you would call him, he converted, so he's now Shia. So I just find that very fascinating. I would love to know the history there. Joshua?
Wouldn't he have been born Shia though? Because the Pahlavis have always been, the former Shah was Shia. Like the Shahs have always been. If you go far back enough, it was pre-Islam, but the Pahlavi dynasty, and I believe all the previous stuff, like Iran has been Shia ever since the Muslim conquests in the 600s.
Well, there
AD.
was the Qajars, which is actually,
were they not Shia? Oh, really? I didn't know that.
That takes us back to the Khazar and the whole Khazaria.
I thought you meant because the dynasty before the Pahlavi dynasty was called the Qajar dynasty.
Yes,
Qajar.
Qajar, and what we find is Q is KH, J becomes Z, right?
Oh, so, well, I don't know about that, but anyway, the Shah was the Shah, the former Shah, who died. The father, dropping reading recommendations for people. There's a really good book called The Fall of Heaven, which is about the Shah's reign and sort of Iran under his rule. And he was a very contradictory figure in the sense that he, carried a pocket copy of the Quran with him everywhere. And he sort of had this disconnect where he did genuinely consider himself to be very devout in a different way than the Ayatollahs, but he also had mistresses and went to party, things like that. The Shah was a very complex individual. I don't think that, and I think there was a lot that could have been avoided, forget who it was who pointed it out, but the revolution of 1979 was not initially led by the Islamists. It was primarily secular people. At the time, Iran had a strong communist movement. They were very involved, and we sort of initially were open to the Islamists taking over because we thought, oh, well, at least they won't be aligned with the Soviet Union. And then on law of unintended consequences there that, leading to disastrous effects. And you could go into a whole thing about, and the book talks about this, like how Jimmy Carter's policy really undermined the Shah and led in many respects to the collapse of his government. The son is, I don't think, a serious contender to whatever comes after the Islamic Republic. I would be very surprised if it was a restoration of the Pahlavi dynasty.
Okay, yes, and for the YouTube viewers out there, and just generally, please, if we can get Persians on here of any background, we want to hear their voices. There's another interesting part of the Pahlavis. There's a whole version of Freemasonry just for the Pahlavis. I'm not saying all Pahlavi supporters are part of that, but it's just many threads in there. Joshua from Virginia.
Thanks. Yeah, so much to talk about, so little time. Reza Pahlavi doesn't want to be Shah. He doesn't want to go back and be Shah. He's been in support of a liberal democracy, or
running as president, I think, right? I mean,
sure.
that's
yeah. Yeah. Iran already has the infrastructure to be a standardized, Arab republic, right? It's not Arab, but that's sort of what we call them over there, right? We call them Arab republics. Okay, so call it a Persian republic. They have the infrastructure for that. They just need to do away with the theocratic stranglehold of the Ayatollah and the IRGC radicals, which is not going to happen without outside intervention, or at least not in a way or a time period that is going to do anybody any good. Iran is much more destabilizing to the area than the, we always hear this, in post-war on terror world here, that at least Saddam Hussein was a stabilizing figure, blah 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 blah. Completely not true. And I don't think it's logical to suggest that if the United States wouldn't have gone into Iraq for whatever reason, okay, that Saddam Hussein would have, I don't know, been again some stabilizing figure. His children, who were going to take power after him, thankfully were complete and total psychopaths. It's not always America's fault. Iran has proxies with Hezbollah. They have proxies with Iraqi militias. They have proxies with the Houthis. They have proxies with Hamas. And up until recently, they had proxies in Syria. Now is the time for definitive action. Trump is not going to put boots on the ground in Iran, but what we can do is provide air superiority, command and control support in the region, and money and sanctions on the Iranian regime that don't end. So I guess I'll just throw that out there and leave it at that. Until next time.
Thank you, Joshua. Claudio?
I agree with Joshua that the Reza Pahlavi son is not interested to govern instead of the Ayatollah, but what I mean is that he's seen as a, how can I say, a catalyst for a change, because I don't see anything different from now except a presidential republic without the vetting or the shadow power of the Ayatollah. Is that the only thing that they need to do? In reality, it's something really simple that they should do. They should be a presidential republic, but without an Ayatollah that suddenly arrives and say, hey, no, this guy is committed adultery. Let's fire him. He cannot be president. Because is that what it could happen in practice at the time, or it's happening now? That you do a little bullshit that the Islamic law doesn't like, despite being a good president, can be kicked out. That's the problem. But I want to, now that there is Andre, to focus on another thing, because it has been interesting to see how Trump easily supported Israel once he said, hey, we are able to do everything alone, we have the resources, we have everything. You just have to give us the pat on the shoulder to say this thing is okay, but it didn't happen the same thing between Ukraine and Russia. And the thing he says is not, in my opinion, fault of Ukraine that it doesn't have the resources. I think the fault is of Europe, because it's not because Israel doesn't have to rely on other allies to fight against Iran. It's Israel himself versus Iran, and other Arab states say, okay, we'll not do anything because it's destabilizing also for us, Iran. Instead, what is happening in Ukraine is that Russia controls through funding on political parties all Europe, and then it's not Ukraine versus Russia, it's Ukraine and Europe versus Russia. And if we were able to let Ukraine does the fight alone, we will not stay in this situation if we see the symmetry. If we were able to already, for example, keep them the nuclear warheads at the time of the memorandum, all the stuff. This made me reflect on the fact that Europe is not able to reason like Israel in certain cases, despite having a lot of enemies in its surrounding, Russia, North Africa, also the Middle Orient himself. And despite that, we still continue to insist to be friends with everyone. and they try to constrain Ukraine to the same. I say, no, you don't have to let your people dying because it's not good that they die. No, they are not dying because they want to die. They're dying because they want to keep their sovereignty and want to keep their freedom. And so it's weird that it doesn't sound the same reason in Europe simply for that, because Ukraine has bullshit allies, while instead Israel had just the US. The US say, hey, you have the resources, you have the intelligence inside Iran to defeat the regime. Okay. Well, instead Europe didn't do anything to have intelligence inside Russia or anything else. They just did the bullshit thing like the democracy initiative, let be killed Boris Nemtsov, exile Khodorkovsky. We are not being able to do anything to be a pressure on Russia.
Thank you for that, Claudio. Yes, and I guess I'll just add in my own what I'm observing, right? So one, this is one of my tweets, right? While the military-industrial complex is individually made up of geniuses in physics, engineering, and science, right? At its core and in the aggregate, the MIC is blank, you know, what is it? The word sofa, and then king, we thoughted. I mean, the Iron Dome is failing, right? Essentially, the way to, I guess, defeat the Iron Dome is you hammer it. It's almost like how do you defeat the Border Patrol, right? You create a mass something in one force, so you draw the forces in, then you create openings in the other part. If I'm not mistaken, that's how the Iron Dome was overwhelmed, right? Andre from New York?
Well, the Iron Dome's key mission is small rockets from Gaza and defending from Hezbollah attacks from the north as well. There's no technology that exists to defend from ICBMs right now, and so that's what we're seeing. Not ICBM, sorry, medium range ballistic missils. That's what we're seeing pound most successfully against civilian targets in and I include energy stations in that civilian target that should not be targeted in Israel. And that's what's being effective. They're also learning from using the same kind of drones that Russia is using, the Shahed drones, using those to overwhelm local defenses as well. And frankly speaking, there is no safe defense from either a large Shahed drone or a missile that you blow up, because these are all going to explode over civilian areas, and the shrapnel sometimes is just as deadly. What we're seeing, we're still seeing a major difference between the defense this time as well as what happened in October of 2024, when there was a much more public international alliance with French and British jets in the air shooting down those medium range rockets as they were being launched from Iran. We're not seeing that. I'm still not very clear about what's happening in terms of the international defense of Israel. There's been a lot of talk of intelligence sharing. There's been talk about something being done with ship-based defenses from the Western Alliance, as well as ground-based defenses, because, of course, as we all know, there are nearly 1 million American citizens who live in Israel. So we are, of course, wedded in some way of defending them as well. But it is first of all, it is different than what happened under Biden. I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's a political decision, given the Tucker and Charlie Kirk and other outrage that I'm glad Sean brought up in the show today, because there is a split. We've heard it from Daryl directly. In terms of MAGA having some divisive opinions. We have a diverse range of opinions as far as Ukraine as well. But Claudio, in response to you, the interesting parallels here are, one, Israel had that defense in October that Ukraine was asking for in February 2022. There were U.S. senators on the ground in Poland who are seeing streams of refugees come in February, March of 2022, and all the people were asking for is close the skies, close the skies. Can you just shoot down the stuff that's coming over from other areas? And Ukraine has never received that. So that's a major difference in terms of air defense by the Western allies for Ukraine and Israel. On the flip side, we have had scores more weapons-based support being sent to Ukraine, both by the United States and Europe. And now we know that Ukraine is supplying 40% of its own munitions. Europe is roughly the same amount, and America is rapidly dwindling. And the main discussion at the G7 will be, can Ukraine/Europe buy weapons from the United States directly for Ukraine's defense? But that's the main difference for me. Also, a big difference is Ukraine is not targeting any nuclear facilities. That is being targeted by Israel, and that's a key reason why they're attacking, is to denuclearize Iran. I'll be in Washington for a set of conferences this week, but one of my big questions in talking to people is who is taking the point in securing nuclear fissile material in Iran? We don't know how much they have. We have some idea. We don't know exactly where it is, how much there is, and who is in charge of locking it up. I don't think Israel it has the capability of both doing what it's doing at Iran and also shepherding a team dedicated to locking up all this fissile material, some of which cannot be locked up if it's part of a strike. Some of it might be the cordoned off area that can never be, entered in without some kind of containment. So there's differences between what's happening within two countries, and it'll be interesting going forward to see the reaction from both sides.
Thank you, Andre. I wanted to bring Jen back in. Maybe she had that thought pop back up.
Well, what I was going to say in terms of this comparison between Ukraine and Israel, and I'm not necessarily supporting any sides on this, but Israel has been a long time ally of the United States. And though we've had an interest definitely in Ukraine, it just hasn't held sort of that same position as a longtime ally. And for a good part of Israel's history, the U.S. has really been, in reality, their only ally. Sometimes Europe has been kind of pulled in with a lot of pressure, but I don't think Europe ever really wanted to be supportive of Israel. But I wanted to bring up that point. That's all.
Thank you, Jen. Joshua?
Thanks. Yeah, so it's not just the Iron Dome, FYI. So Israel has the Iron Dome, Arrow, and David's Sling as their anti-missile defense. And it's doing a pretty good job right now, as Andre said. Obviously, you're not vaporizing and atomizing missiles once you use these interceptors. There's shrapnel that occurs as a part of that, but it's much less damaging to buildings. And obviously, when the towns in Israel and the cities and towns in Israel are under threat, I believe everybody has like a mandated panic room, or not panic room, but bomb shelters. So most of the people are in those bomb shelters. The other thing, Israel still has air dominance over the skies of Iran. So although you're correct that Iran, in order to get through these air defense, Iran has to essentially volley fire, right? They have to use 100 rockets, 100 missiles at a time to try to overwhelm so that a few get through. So I would say to that extent, the Israeli air defense is working remarkably, but it's in concert with that air dominance that they have over Iran right now, so that they can consistently reduce Iran's capability of launching those volley fire missile attacks. But also, there's another thing that we didn't bring up. Iran does have, I don't know how many they have, but they do have hypersonic missile technology. Hypersonic missiles, we don't really have a counter for that I'm aware of right now. So I would imagine that they don't have many of those, but they do have some. So I don't know, what kind of, what we're going to develop and what's going to come up to take care of hypersonics. Look, so just for everybody's information, not that anybody really cares, as an Iraq war vet with 2 deployments to Iraq, I would say my foreign policy positions are defined, and here's going to throw you for a loop. Probably 70% the UN failure in Rwanda, and so the whole UNAMIR probably informs my opinion about 70%, and 30% is my individual experience forward deployed overseas as a combat troop during the War on Terror, for what it's worth.
Thank you, Joshua. Yes, and I believe it was a bunch of monarchs in Iraq before the generals, in Libya before Gaddafi, right? So that would also be a history I would like to kind of go back through just to see those monarchies. Because, you know, the joke is, at least with a monarch, you know whose head to cut off, right? I mean, there's someone in charge taking account. So, you know, it's just, it's very interesting there. Claudio?
No, I wish to answer a second to Andre because he missed a third factor to the ones he already say. I say that the problem of Euro is that he doesn't want to have a culture of dominance. I mean, he doesn't want to be dominant on the military scale. He wants to be a diplomatic dominance. A diplomatic dominance can be anything. It can be let Russia enter, have a Korea model and divide in East Korea and West Korea like they did in East Germany. It can mean let Zelensky decide that he wants to give up by himself and let him substitute by another Yanukovych. I mean, for me, the problem is that Israeli doesn't have allies that say we have to win by diplomacy. Neither in civilization you can win by diplomacy. It's bullshit. If someone say in civilization want to win by diplomacy, it's like to ask to win for the cultural war. You can do it after the Second World War. Let's be honest. And another thing is that because we have this thing in Europe, the fixation of diplomacy, my fear is that in the US is happening the same with this Tucker Carlson, with the Charlie Kirk, and I will tell you a thing, Peter, rather than you are speaking about an isolationist position. Coolidge was having an isolationist position, but at the same time he was the same guy that let the piano dolls to reconstruct Germany. The ones that were able to win and have failed because Weimar didn't want to fight honestly against the Nazis. Because like Miss Brennan said, hey, no, free speech create the Nazis. No, it's the opposite. It's the censorship that led the Nazi to be more powerful. If they were fighting on a democratic scale against the Centrum, we will not have this problem. So in my opinion, it's a matter to say that we restrain, but we still want to have an international position. It's different to be American only, as Joshua said, because what we can do in Israel is easy. Defend, avoid civilian casualties. Let Israel be constrained to have a deal with Iran. Tell to them, hey, tell to the Ayatollah, look, or you change the way in which they do presidential elections, or you move self-exile like Khomeini. They have a lot of choices to do that are not an interventionist one, because I already watched the answer to the Wall Street Journal think of the signaling of the deal. Israel said not, of course, they want to defeat the regime. They didn't want the regime simply weakened, because they don't want the same guy that tries again the enrichment. But at the same time, Israel is making the error that you said, that it could create another wave of people that will be anti-Israeli and for other reasons. For the reason that they bombed, for the reason that they had civilian casualties because they are not able to just fire the military objectives. I would say that diplomacy is something that arrives after a fight. It's not something that you want to prevent a fight, because sometimes prevent a fight creates the opposite thing. As I say, it brings the Nazis, it brings the far-right political parties saying bullshit. They did a lot of stuff. Sorry, I talked a lot, Raul.
Thank you, Claudio. No, it's all good, Claudio. Peter?
There's a lot there, for sure. I will just note a couple of things. There is a bit of a disconnect. There's the Wall Street Journal story. I mean, first of all, like there is nothing like, you know, we came to a separate arrangement with the Houthis where we would stop hitting them if they stopped targeting American ships. That didn't prevent Israel from doing anything to defend itself or take, you know, operations against the Houthis that it felt was necessary for its security. Obviously, it's a much larger scale thing here. I would also note, there is, if you, there's been certain comments that have implied, like that the leadership in Tehran is completely irrational and like hasn't, again, I'm not fans of theirs or their ideology, but it's a little more nuanced than that. And I would point just in as example to the fact that the rhetoric when it comes to the United States specifically, the statements, the rhetoric that they have said is the Americans are we are holding the Americans co-responsible for this. That's what they've said. However, they have not actually targeted any American assets as of yet. That could change. So they are more, in that respect, they are being more pragmatic than their rhetoric implies, at least at this moment. So I would just note that.
Thank you for that, Peter. Andre?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Jen's comment about Israel and the United States and Ukraine and the United States. It has been law since 2014 that the United States is obligated, it is committed, not a treaty, but it is United States law that the United States will assist Ukraine in recovering its territorial territories occupied by Russia, and that it will lead an international coalition in support of Ukraine. That's something that American congressmen, American presidents have redeclared time after time. So that's just one thing that exists. There are also multiple charters, multiple treaties between these two countries. And Ukraine began supporting NATO operations back in the mid 90s. As early as 1992, Ukraine had an agreement. There have been 44,000 Ukrainian servicemen who have deployed in support roles for NATO operations since that time. That is different than the 26 international peacekeeping missions that Ukraine has been part of, because when you're part of a UN-backed peacekeeping mission, there are international funds for that. Ukraine has been paying out of pocket, as NATO members do, to support NATO missions as a non-NATO member. That includes ISAF, but it also includes the follow-up operations in training Afghanistan citizens and army members after ISAF finished up. So what I'm trying to point out is that Ukraine has been an active military ally of the United States since almost the beginning of the renewal of its independence in 1991. That is not something that I would say you could point out to specific operations that Israel has done for Ukraine, for America's goals in the Middle East. I'm not saying that I deride Israel's actions. I'm just pointing out that if we're talking about allies, the United States and Ukraine have firm commitments to each other, which is why the United States is doing what it's doing. And also Ukraine has done the work about putting out multiple, not just service members, they've deployed ships that they don't have enough patrolling of the Black Sea. They've deployed ships throughout the Mediterranean numerous times on counterterrorism issues. These are all in support of the United States goals. This is why working with allies or keeping a big coalition is more important than anything in my mind. I'm a big coalitionist. I don't think that going it alone, whether you're Israel or the United States, is the right thing to do. And I think it pays off when international allies support Israel during an attack by Iran like this. Going it alone is never the thing. And Ukraine never went anywhere alone. It was always in coalition with other partners.
Thank you, Andre. And rumor has it you're the favorite member of our morning coalition here.
Can I respond to that?
Please,
Jen.
Yes.
Yeah. And thank you for that information. Some of that I did not know. I think what I'm really talking about is in terms of a lot of people out there like me, okay, we've spent, my whole life, I've been, politically interested, and a topic has always been Israel and the U.S. support. Okay, so I'm just saying we've had a lifetime of that. The relationship with Ukraine is significantly newer. I shouldn't have, and I didn't mean to imply that it wasn't valued and important or anything like that, or that there wasn't an officialness to it. like
and that's what I try to. That's why I try to educate people. It's not from a stance of that you shouldn't have that opinion. I agree that many Americans probably have that opinion,
right.
but if you didn't were like Josh and maybe see these service members deployed overseas, wouldn't know.
And I think if Israel were to wait for a coalition, they wouldn't still exist as a country. So there you go.
Thank you, Jen. Joshua?
Yeah, thanks. I think it is weird. Like Andre, I'm a big coalitions guy. Granted, I don't have faith in coalitions, so I think I'm a hopeful coalitions guy. And again, the reasons I don't have faith in coalitions is because of UNAMIR, is because of Darfur, is because of South Sudan. Okay, as far as UN coalitions and peacekeeping is concerned, for whatever reason, a coalition against Iran in support of Israel is more likely to come from Abraham Accord members and adjacent Sunni republics or Sunni kingdoms in that area, rather than it will come from Europe. But MAGA has this weird thing with Ukraine, and I don't know what it is, but they just have a real thing with Ukraine, and I think a lot of conspiracy is involved. Much like liberals in the United States have a thing against Israel, MAGA Republicans have some conspiratorial stuff going on with Ukraine, and so I don't, I think, I don't know why.
Thank you for that, Joshua. Yes, we're going to be closing out the live here, and just you guys know your crazy host perspective, right? On one, there's the two sides, right? Obviously, people are saying, well, of course, Iran wants a nuke. Why wouldn't they want it? Then you've got Tulsi Gabbard signing documents. No, there's no nukes. And then, what are they doing? I just want to remind folks from a factual historical basis, according to J. Klein Wachter, okay, the Stirling engine powered Germany, all right, grid-free. So this whole concept that nuclear power is the be-all, end-all. I'm not saying that it's nuclear power is, iron or whatever, nuclear energy. It's dense, right? The uranium, okay? But Germany was powered. They had closed the loop prior to World War II, okay? No one has debunked this to date. The Stirling engine, Robert Stirling, Scottish clergyman, scientist. Okay, why did he invent it? Because steam engines were blowing up, were causing harm. There were the risks of the Industrial Revolution. So we had a true enlightenment that has been covered up. And because of this cover up, right, we have this obsession about grid power as the be all, end all, right? So I'm just hoping to get people to think beyond this, dialectic back and forth, right? And so in that, we're going to be closing out here, guys. Hang tight.
Cut anyone off.
But that's a wrap. Remember, you can catch us live Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern. It's your chance to join the conversation and have your voice heard. Just check the link in the description or visit americastalk.show. Together, through the free exchange of ideas, we can truly make America great again. Don't miss out. Tune in and be part of the dialogue.
All right. That's a